everybody. I feel like these days I've kind of become a walking obituary for recently deceased musicians. We recently lost, of course, yikes, we recently lost Jimmy Cliff. I talked a lot about Raul Mallo's recent passing. I absolutely adored him and the Mavericks. And then this past week we lost Joe Ely, which is very sad. The great Americana roots musician from Texas who was a huge Clash fan. I think he passed away this past Monday. And on Tuesday I saw on the official Joe Strummer Instagram account, they posted a video of Joe sitting in the studio playing the Sonny Curtis, Bobby Fuller 4 song, I Fought the Law, which of course the Clash covered on at least the US version of their debut album. They released two different versions of it. The one released in the UK came out in 1977. The one released in the US came out a year or two later. But on the American version, the Clash did a brilliant cover of I Fought the Law. Not quite like the Bobby Fuller 4 version, a little bit more amped up. But Joe Ely playing it on acoustic guitar and singing it was just fantastic. He was a great player and also just another great voice, very distinctive voice. But it got me to thinking a lot about that song and the fact that was, I want to say that was the first Clash song I ever really heard, was their cover of I Fought the Law on a local radio station here in Chicago. And I was kind of entranced by it. I thought it was pretty amazing. I understood that they were a punk band, but that didn't really sound punk to me. That sounded like pretty straightforward rock and roll. And, you know, hearing Joe Ely play it, thinking about his passing, thinking about Raul Mallo, thinking about the Clash. Of course, we lost Joe Strummer 25 years ago. It'll be 25 years in just a few days. He died in December of 2000. No, I'm sorry. That's wrong. It'll be 23 years. He died in December of 2002. But in any event, that's not why you called. It'll be 23 years in a few days. But more to the point, I was thinking a lot about why a lot of these young, kind of up-and-coming musicians in the mid to late 70s and early 80s were kind of going back to very fundamental rock and roll. When you think about it, that's even kind of what the Ramones were doing. One of my favorite Ramones songs, although most hardcore Ramones critics would tell you, or fans I guess, would tell you that it was a bit overproduced. But I love the song Do You Remember Rock and Roll from the End of the Century album, where this is exactly what they're talking about. You know, they're trying to sort of recapture this spark of early rock and roll and what made it exciting, what made it great. And I think that's a lot of what punk was doing. I think that's what roots musicians were doing, like Joe Ely. And I think that's what a lot of times musicians do when they're trying to break new ground, is it's almost like they time travel into the past to find the thing that made music great in the first place, and then they bring it forward into the future. The first time I heard hip-hop was probably, you know, something like Run DMC on MTV way back in the day. And my first thought when I heard that sound and when I heard rap was kind of like, yeah, that is rock and roll. That's more rock and roll than most rock music that's out there at the time. And, you know, they weren't just going back to sort of the earliest musical traditions. They were really going back to like the earliest oral history traditions of, you know, from early civilization, where, you know, you memorized stories in the form of poetry so that you could remember them. And that really kind of strikes a chord, I think, in people. And there was something about rap that was very, very new and almost futuristic, because I'd never even conceived of such a thing before, but also went way back in the mists of time and brought this like really essential art form to the front. Amazing, just amazing stuff. So I think that's really kind of what punk was doing. I think that's what Raul Mallo was doing with the kind of music the Mavericks did, going back to an earlier type of country, an earlier type of Latin music, and finding something in that music that's like really, really essential and important and validating. And and they made that, sort of the centerpiece of their music. I think that's what punk did. I think that's what hip hop did. I think that's what a lot of these Americana and roots musicians have done. I think that's what grunge did back in the 90s. I just remember this famous quote, speaking of hip hop, the famous quote from Joe Strummer where he said, hip hop picked up where punk left off and ran full steam ahead. And historically, that's not entirely accurate because hip hop and punk evolved side by side. But I understood what he was getting at was that both art forms, both music forms, found this really kind of vital, essential thing and kind of stripped it down and put that, that spark at the center of the music. And even though it was a brand new sound, something that people hadn't heard before, it had that essential quality that really made the music great. So anyway, it's a very, very sad loss that Joe Ely passed away. I promise I'll find other things to talk about than musicians passing away, but it's been quite a wild ride for the past couple of years in that regard. So have a great Friday, have a happy holiday if I don't get a chance to drop in again before then, and take care, everybody.